in the minds of all the humans that are practicing yoga, that there is something that innately connects them because we're all practicing yoga together. And it would be no different than like all the Buddhists or all the Christians or all the Muslims or all the Jews or like whatever groups and whatever people are practicing and really living that lifestyle, that in this fourth wave of yoga, there's an opportunity, and this is like my prediction side of things, that there's going to be a noticeable power shift.
The Yoga Connection with Zorananda is a deep dive into the world of yoga, exploring the rich history of tradition, methodology, and practices both ancient and modern. Follow along as yoga is explored through solo episodes to guest interviews to understand its vast reach around the world.
Hello and welcome to the Yoga Connection. My name is Zorananda. It's been a while since my last podcast episode. I think the last one was in October. I've taken some time off in the winter, mainly to focus on recording and releasing music. That takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and so I prioritized that over doing this podcast. And I also took a nice little break just kind of from everything over the winter, just to allow myself to relax. I find I go into obsession with everything, and my life is fairly busy as well with, working a full-time job, teaching yoga part-time, writing and recording music, and then trying to manage this podcast. So I'm happy to be back. We're still in the middle of the Ashtanga Yoga series. The last 3 episodes I did were on Asana and the 4 waves of Asana. So today we are going into the 4th and final wave. But we're not quite finishing up Asana. In the next episode, I'm going to go into the actual Asana practice. I wanted to preface the practice itself with the history of yoga and how it came to the West. And this episode is going to be more about a personal story of my experience with yoga in this 4th wave. So me being a person that, kind of came into the end of the 3rd wave and what the 4th wave is and what that looks like. So, I'm entitling this episode Personal Journey and Predictions, to kind of showcase what kind of effect yoga has on a person individually and then in society, and how we are moving into this 4th wave and how we're actually in the 4th wave and when that transition happened. So like I said, this is an episode more about my personal journey. And so I want to go into how I got into yoga. I have done an episode like this in the past, and so I just want to revisit some things that I may not have spoken about. And, how we can look at this 4th wave as a precursor from the exit of the 3rd wave and everything that I talked about in the 3rd wave, especially about cults and how especially Western yogis have a proclivity to create a cult, that there's some kind of calling within them to take the knowledge that they've learned and to adapt it into their own program, which then inevitably falls apart because of this kind of like yogic curse that I talked about, where when you get initiated into a lineage, that there is a protective quality to that initiation, that if you are going to go and abandon that lineage, that there are going to be some consequences to it. And namely that you're going to start your own thing, you're going to get a bunch of followers, it's going to seem great at first, but then because of your corruptibility, you're going to end up crashing everything and really diving into a darkness that you didn't really foresee, but you adopt because you think you have the power to kind of overcome it and utilize it, and so on. And so how I want to start this episode is a quote from my teacher, Yoga Rishi Vishwaketu, in an interview that I did with him. You can check out that interview. I have it up on my streaming, wherever you're finding this episode. It's my interview with Yoga Rishi Vishwaketu. I think it's like episode... I don't even know. I think it's like one of the episodes in the 20s or something. But regardless, when I was interviewing him, I asked him, how did you get into yoga? And he said, quote, "I didn't get into yoga. This body was programmed with yoga." That was a pretty big realization for me in that moment. When he said it, things just immediately clicked. And it really resonates with my own journey. Because when I look back at my own experience with yoga and how I got into yoga, officially I was 23 when I started doing a yoga practice. But when I look back at my childhood, there were elements of yoga in my life that I just didn't consider yoga that I was doing. So, and I think it's something that we all do as children. We play around and we figure things out and we just do random things. And so I was a very active kid when I played. It wasn't like I played with toys and stuff like that, but I loved playing outside and I loved fighting. I loved doing acrobatics and pretending I was a ninja and all these crazy things. And so part of that play, we're doing things like shoulder stand and headstand and full wheel and doing these yoga poses that when you're a kid, and when I was a kid, I never thought that these were yoga poses. There was no knowledge of this stuff, but I'm doing these things anyway. And the one experience that was the most profound for me was something that I would do at night. Again, totally intuited and nothing that I ever learned. I must have been like 8 years old. And, I grew up in the 90s when the internet was in its infancy. So there was no way for me to look any of this stuff up. My parents were, traditional Serbian immigrants. And so they didn't have any information like this at all. We had no books, nothing. But I started to explore breath work just on my own. I would lay in my bed, I would lay on my stomach, and I would inhale as deep as I can and tighten everything up and really fill my lungs with air. And then I would exhale and soften into my bed. And I just loved the sensation of my body just going completely soft and emptying out my lungs. And I would just do this night after night until one night I noticed something different, where my thoughts in my head started to grow louder. And suddenly there would be this conversation that was happening. And I was almost an observer of the conversation. It wasn't the type of thinking where you are the one making the thoughts and making the words happen. You're the one that is kind of ruminating in your mind. I would suddenly observe a conversation that was happening, and it would grow louder and louder and louder, and it would kind of echo around in my head to the point where I started to feel myself grow. My head would start to grow and expand, and my body would start to grow and expand. And I'd feel myself expanding up towards the ceiling. And there's this one particular night where I expanded and I felt my back touch the ceiling, and I immediately shot back to my body and then passed out. And that was kind of one of the last times I did that, because it freaked me out as well. I was a kid. I didn't know what I was doing. But I thought to myself it'd be important to remember that. And it wasn't until, later in my life when I started to get into yoga that I recalled that moment and thought to myself, oh, I was doing some kind of breath work and it triggered a kind of outer body experience that then led to more outer body experiences and more phenomenal experiences that I started to get answers from these weird experiences that were happening to me. And so when I think about Vishwaji's quote, I did not get into yoga, this body was programmed with yoga, it got me thinking, was my body programmed with yoga? And when I think about the difference between the two of us, Vishwaji is Indian. He grew up in the foothills of the Himalayas. He started yoga when he was 6 to 8 years old. So it's evident that it makes sense for him to believe and to think that his body was programmed with yoga because of how close of a proximity he is in that world. His uncle operated a gurukul, which is like a yoga school, kind of in the countryside. And so he was very close to it. And so then when I think about myself, I didn't grow up with yoga. It wasn't close at all. I have my own closeness to religion through my parents, through Serbian Christian Orthodoxy, but there's nothing yoga related at all. And so it almost doesn't make sense for me to think and for me to consider, well, my body was programmed with yoga, but how? And in my studies of yoga and getting into what it means to become a yogi, that programming isn't dependent on the external environment. That the programming that we have innate within our body and innate within our consciousness is something that is brought into this world before this life even exists. And that's a really hard concept to grasp, to think that before your physical body comes into manifestation, that there's your essence of consciousness that then has a programming in it that when the body is born, the consciousness can go into the body and then live out the programming through that body. And that's just the way that I think about it. So I made sense of this body was programmed with yoga through that lens rather than thinking that I got into yoga. And it makes sense for me personally because of the experiences that I've had and the way that I was able to advance through the yoga practice and the way that it makes sense to me as well. There's a comprehension or a level of comprehension that I have about the yoga practice that it's I don't want to say it's a rare thing, but it's for me noticeable that I have an understanding of the things that most people don't. And that's not to toot my own horn. That's not to be egoic about it. It's just to recognize that there's something innate about my experience with yoga that maybe most people don't experience. And so this is what's getting me into how the waves of yoga work and what the first 3 waves of yoga did to prepare for this 4th wave and the kind of seeds that have been implanted within humanity. And that whether we really know it or not, that over the last 100 plus years, so it'd be, about 120, 140 years of yoga coming to the West, that through the adoption of yoga into the minds of the Westerners, the minds of the Americans and the Canadians and the Europeans, is that those seeds planted in those people and those generations carries forward in consciousness. And so the people that are born now in this generation are going to have an element of yoga in them and in their body And the consciousness that's coming through is going to also have that yoga in them. So it's a kind of like active resonance where you have your consciousness, which has the seed of yoga in it. And then you have a body that is prepared to be able to host a consciousness with yoga, because now that body has yoga. But here's the trippy thing. When I think about my family, my parents were never into yoga. My grandparents, my great grandparents, like I don't know if there's really anybody in my family that I know of that did any yoga. But when I look at my, especially like my dad and my ancestry, we were all very strong, limber person. Like my dad is 75 years old and he's just naturally flexible. He has no problem doing seated forward fold, and he's never traditionally done a day of yoga in his life, but he's been super fit all of his life and very active, and a very strong person. And so when I think about what I just said of like, okay, well, you know, there's this influence of yoga that is coming from India and embedding the philosophy into the Americas, into Canada, into Europe. My parents are from Serbia, and I don't think anybody until really recently, maybe in the last 30 years, had come and taught yoga. So there was no way for my family to be even interested or even involved with anything yogic other than possibly similarities in philosophy, because I think in world religions, there's an overlap of philosophy. There's an adoption of ideas. And, you know, when I talked to my dad about the history of Serbia and really like the Balkans, from the medieval times and from the time of like Alexander the Great, there was trade through the Silk Road from the Balkans and India. And so my wondering here is that there was some kind of exchange that happened centuries ago, and that knowledge through, or just exchange of knowledge through religions happened. And so when we look at, you know, doctrines of saints, doctrines of or like just the Bible itself, it seems like there is this amalgamation from different cultures that are then going to influence the people itself. So maybe my family and, you know, the people of Serbia from centuries ago didn't take on a yogic practice, but that there were these little seeds in a likeness of philosophy that was exchanged when, you know, 1,000 years ago, there was trade that was happening. And so that's just my way in my mind of kind of justifying, okay, even though directly my family didn't have anything to do with yoga, that something in my genetics, something within the Serbian consciousness of people, that there were these little sprinklings of seeds of yoga, if there was some likeness in philosophy that was adopted of, say, how to treat people, and especially in Ashtanga Yoga, right? Like not lying and reserving your energy and not stealing and not harming people, that those are just kind of basic fundamentals of morality that most cultures are going to have. And so then when it goes through time to me, through all of my lineage, all of my ancestry, it comes to me, that then those seeds finally are germinating and sprouting. And, you know, out of my sisters and my brother and my parents, that it was through my body that yoga can actually then sprout through, that there was then something within my consciousness as well, that even before this life, that as a conscious being, I have yoga in my programming. And so for me as a consciousness to then really fully express my yoga connection, I had to find a body and I had to find a lineage that's going to really help facilitate that in the most conducive way for myself, right? Like, of course, I could have been born in India. I could have been born in Sri Lanka or anywhere where yoga is like traditionally more prevalent, but there's something about my parents' lineage that can allow a kind of new twist on yoga to come out. And that's, again, these are more anecdotal and more subjective and more of like my story and who I am as a person and how yoga kind of like translates through me. And then the synchronicities involved in meeting my teachers and having the experiences that I've had and following that trajectory. And that's the important thing, right? When these seeds are starting to sprout and you're starting to get a good sense of what they are, you want to nurture them to the best of your ability. And that's the key thing, to the best of your ability. That doesn't mean that you have to drop absolutely everything and go full force. If that's in your karma, then that's great. But there are going to be things that are going to be also pertinent to your development. And so when I think of overall my arc as a living entity and a being on this planet, that there are other veins of truth and other veins of experience that I also want to get into, where it doesn't make sense for me to just go, okay, like all in on yoga. Because I also love being a musician. I also like being athletic. I also like fitness and doing CrossFit. I also really love working with my family. And so I think there's an overarch through that where yoga is more of a foundational thing. It's more of a supportive thing than it is like a career opportunity. And that's just for me personally. There's a lot of like beautiful teachers who, for their own sake, it makes sense for them to lean into the yogic path fully, and the opportunities open up for them to do that. And so when I look at my experiences as a child and doing kind of yogic stuff, and then leading up to my 20s where I was getting into the new age world and I was getting into meditations, that I was noticing that innately I was really good at meditation. I was really good at visualizing. I was really good at just having strange, phenomenal experiences, that the physical side of things was missing. And it made sense for me then, out of like spirit connection, mind connection, motion connection, that then the physical connection also needed to be there, and to then get into doing yoga practice. And that's what led to meeting my teachers now, and first meeting the creator of Agama Yoga, Swami Vivekananda Saraswati, who I don't want to call Swami anymore because he's very problematic. And if you listen to my previous podcast with Mangala, we both went to Agama, and so we talk about Narcissus, that's his like given Romanian name, and the problems that he brought about in basically turning Agama into a cult, and so on and so forth. So yeah, go and listen to that one. And but the seeds of yoga and how they're growing and the synchronicities are going to grow wild at first, because you're just letting this thing grow. You're so excited, but then eventually you need to start pruning and you need to start growing in a direction. And the direction that I was growing with the Agama needed pruning. And so I remember in 2011 was the year I met this couple, Blair and Asaf. And it was, I think it was in July, and it was on a Sunday. And my friend Chris, he's like my best friend. He's also an amazing yogi and mystic and spiritual teacher here in the city, and he does amazing things. And he called me up on a Sunday, and I think it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. And I still remember exactly what he said. He's like, man, I know you have nothing going on today. You need to come to yoga. Because at that time, I sort of got Chris into all the spirituality stuff. And then he got into yoga, and then he really went deep into yoga, and the tables turned, and he was like always trying to get me to go out to do yoga, and I didn't ever want to go. And so this day he was like, I know you have nothing going on. Let's go to this yoga class. And I'm forgetting who the teacher was. I want to think it was either Jana or Emily. And I have this conversation with Chris all the time, and he's like, no, I think it was this teacher. But the important part of the story is after the class, the receptionist was this woman named Blair. And Chris and I were talking to her, and she's like, hey, my partner and I are doing this chakra workshop. You guys should come. It's in August. And at that time, I was scouring the internet for all things yoga. And this is at a time, again, this is like, 2011, where it's not at all like how the internet is today. And it was actually way better because there was no algorithm. And when you search for something, it just brought up websites. And so it was like kind of still in the infancy of Google. And as much as I like try to find really authentic stuff, I just really wasn't, because I was finding a lot of new age stuff. So, and it was all really the same thing over and over. The chakras correspond to the rainbow, and it's in this color spectrum, and the chakras is for this, and this crystal goes with this chakra. And so to then find this woman who's like, hey, we're doing a chakra workshop, just suddenly I was like, yes, this is what I need, right? And she explained, yeah, we, come from this like tantric school, and, it's like authentic information about the chakras. And so I went, and little did I know, it was actually a workshop introducing the first level of Agama. But they still went through the chakras, and I ended up meeting Asaf, and I was just blown away, because it was like my first time in my life where I felt like I met a true yogi, and someone that practices like 3 to 4 hours a day, every single day. He's just like so embodied in the practice. And so after the workshop, I invited Asaf and Blair to teach out of my apartment. And so in and around, I think September, October, they started teaching the level 1 Agama out of my apartment. And it was just blowing my mind. It was finally the first time where I felt like I was really learning a traditional sense of yoga, and nothing like I've ever seen, where the warm-ups were very different. The class flow was very different. We're practicing one pose at a time. We're spending, 2 to 3 to 5 minutes and gradually working up our time into each posture. And it led to December, where Asaf was like, hey, we're going to Thailand. So, we're not going to be able to continue teaching. And it was right then and there, I thought to myself, I'm going to go. And I said to him, hey, I'm going to go. And he was like, all right, really? You're going to come to Thailand? I was like, yeah, for sure. And he's like, okay, well, do you have money saved up? And I'm like, no, I don't know what I'm doing here. He's like, okay, well, you're going to need to get a passport. And I was like, yeah, I already have a passport. And he's like, okay, you're going to need to get a visa. You need to like get all this stuff, right? And I was like, don't worry, man, I'll figure it out. And literally 2 weeks later, my dad calls me, because we worked together doing exterior siding. And he says to me, hey, I just got this like large job for us to do. And it paid me exactly what I needed to buy my flight, stay out in Thailand for 2 months, and to do the first 2 levels of Agama. and which is where I met Narcissus. And when I came back, so I had this beautiful time in Thailand. Obviously, I'm in paradise, and it was one of the first times where I remember sitting on my like kind of balcony on the bungalow that I was renting, and looking out into the jungle and just realizing that this is the most peaceful I've ever been in my life, where I don't have to think about work. I don't have to think about anything. And all I think about is just the yoga practice and being on this island. And it was so relieving to finally feel this peace, and to be completely surrounded by nature, to be completely surrounded by jungle. And so when I came back, I immediately jumped into a 200-hour teacher training in August, and that's where I met Vishwaji. And in that, I had, even more profound experiences. And so that year, which would have been 2012, so was this super potent year of initiations in yoga. It really started everything, and so, like I was saying, these seeds of yoga are growing rapidly. It's growing into this like wild tree, and it inevitably led to having to prune this tree down to then grow in a direction. And what inevitably meant was that I would have to then prune away the Agama yoga influence and to choose which teacher would be my teacher. And I inevitably went with Vishwaji. And the reason why I bring this up is how that time period to me is the transition from the third wave of yoga into the fourth wave of yoga, and where this idea of using yoga in a selfish way to then manipulate people into creating a cult is fading away. And I can see that between these two teachers, between Narcissus and between Vishwaji, and how Westerners have this innate level of corruptibility, because Narcissus was from Romania. He's like this big Romanian man. And he did that thing where he had taken these practices and he made his own thing, and then abandoned his connection to his teachers and his lineage and made his own school. And in that, the initiation and like the loving guidance starts to turn into a poison. And this is where that like curse of yoga, or the yogic curse is, where then just over time, inevitably, everything that you're doing is getting tainted by this poison, and you don't realize it until it's too late. And this is why, for me, as a Westerner, as someone that I feel like I do have an innate connection to yoga. I feel like I was born with it when I look at my, my past and my childhood, that it led to an initiation into the Ashtanga Yoga world and with my teacher, and that it's very important for me to stick to the Ashtanga Yoga teachings, even though, like right now in my yoga classes, I started this year teaching a particular sequence, and I've kind of looked at styles that I've learned, and like there was a school here in Edmonton called the Sattva School of Yoga, and they had a brilliant way of designing their classes, of looking at front body activation, side body activation, and back body activation, and then designing a class for the entire month. So for me, I was looking at that and I was like, okay, that's actually pretty brilliant. How do I adopt that into my teaching so that when I look at this entire year and I look at my students, I want my students to evolve in their yoga practice. I want them to feel like they're not only coming for a workout, that they're actually going to progress and they are going to learn these postures and they are going to get really good at them. And so what I formulated was, okay, I can do 3-month chunks over the year where I have a peak posture that we do for 3 months. And we're just focusing on that peak posture. But then I have another posture that we transition from into that peak posture. So the peak posture right now is Warrior 3, and we're using Eagle Pose to transition into Warrior 3. And so the buildup of the class is introducing the elements of Eagle Pose and the elements of Warrior 3 to prepare for it, and then utilizing the front body awareness and the front body activation to then emphasize how the, how the aspects of the posture can be integrated through the front body, all the while using the design of the Ashtanga Yoga teaching. And so for me, it's important to name it that. To see like, hey, yeah, I'm taking elements from the Sattva school that I learned from and from Ashtanga that I'm trained in. I'm not calling it my own thing. I'm not going to abandon those teachings. I'm not going to say, oh, yeah, this is my own thing that I created. This is from my own mind. That's where that yogic curse starts to then turn. So as long as I can still say and openly and tell my students and tell the world, yeah, I've learned this one thing from the Sattva school, which I think is really useful. And this is how I'm adapting it in. And this is the training that I have in the Ashtanga style. And this is what I'm doing as an Ashtanga teacher. And, that's where I feel then this shift from the third wave to the fourth wave is happening, that I'm embodying rather than cutting ties with the yoga that came from the third wave, came from Vishvaji, to then create my own thing. That's not going to fly anymore. And that never did. And that's why you see many documentaries about yoga cults and all these things about how bad it gets when you suddenly, have this group of people moving out to the middle of nowhere and starting a cult and end up, terrible things start happening. And I've been seeing this page on Instagram where, this like Hare Krishna dude is kind of doing the same thing. And I've been kind of watching it and, I think when you have a good idea and you feel really good about it, you're going to have a bias towards continuing doing it. And as long as you can check yourself, as long as you can see that what you're doing isn't going to fall into the same patterns as people in the past, then you can get a good grip of, what you're doing is actually going to be beneficial for the people around you. And that's where I think, with what I'm doing and how I'm teaching, it falls into that category where it's going to be beneficial because I'm not taking any ownership of it. I'm showing up to teach a good class and to help the people and the students in the class to get in better touch with their bodies. And it has nothing to do with me. And it has nothing to do with taking ownership of that process. And, I had this really beautiful moment in my class on Saturday where at the 2/3 or the 3/4 mark of the class, I give an option. So like we just spent all the time doing the warm-ups, doing the sequencing, and then we get to a point where I say, okay, you have an option here. If you're done, you can go into child's pose and you can just rest and relax here, or you can explore crow pose. And so I take people into crow pose in a particular way, and I was demonstrating it and I wasn't really paying attention to the class just yet. because I'm like just in my kind of world of demonstrating it, and I look up and everybody's doing it. And mind you, I have a whole mix of people. I have people who are beginners, who are advanced. I have people who have been practicing with me for like almost 2 years now. And it was so awesome to look up and to see everybody doing and trying the crow pose prep that I was doing. And I said that out loud. I was like, holy, you're all doing it. This is awesome. And I love those moments, and I love being able to express that to the students as well, that they're doing great and everything is, and like we're all growing together. And that to me is what the essence of the fourth wave is, that as a teacher, you can let go of the need for followers, that you can let go of the need for creating some special group of people and leaving society. You can let go of all that stuff. You can just let people be people, and you can let them be in their own world, and that in the studio, the room itself becomes a container where you exit the world, and that the door closes, and in that space, it's like you're in a new dimension, and you don't have to then try to pull people out of their jobs, out of their life, away from their parents, away from their kids. Like, you don't have to try to then be like, okay, well, I'm going to build this compound, like 200 kilometers north of the city, and we're going to live there together and do this every day. You don't have to do that anymore. That yoga now is becoming so potent within society. There's millions and millions and millions of people right now practicing yoga. Like, literally right now, there are millions of people around the world. And so the vibration of it is very, very potent. And so you can tap into that in the space of the studio or at home without having to advertently change your life in any way. And this is what I mean by yoga becomes the foundation, and it becomes a tool and an addition to your life, where you can still go out with your friends. You can still have the same friends, your family, your kids, the school that you go to, the work that you go to, wherever you go to the gym. Whatever it is that your life is that you're building for yourself, that doesn't have to change. You don't have to abandon any of that. And you can have this addition in your life where you feel really good about everything that you're doing and everything that's happening because of the time that you spend in that container. And when you have a room full of people who are doing this work, we're all breathing together, we're all moving together, we're all unraveling our bodies, we're all unraveling tension. You are opening yourself up to a version of yourself that is going to be able to handle the life that you have and to be able to do all the things that you do. And that's why when people ask me, like, how do you do everything? How do you have a full-time job? How do you teach yoga? How do you make and write music and record it? And how do you have this podcast? How do you do all these things? It's literally because of yoga. It's because of the time that I spend connecting to my body, opening my body up, connecting to my breath, and then ultimately preparing myself to connect to something deeper within myself. And you don't have to go anywhere outside away to do that. And the caveat to this is retreats are great. Going out on a vacation is great. However, if you want to be able to move into this next wave of yoga, letting go of abandoning is really important. That you don't have to completely and utterly change your life for something special to happen. And this is the beautiful thing about life. Everybody's karma is going to be different. And so what I just said makes sense to me. It makes sense to a lot of people. There's 1 million people in the city of Edmonton. I'm sure there's a good portion of those people that are like, yeah, I'm not leaving anywhere to do anything. But then there's going to be a handful of people who are not in favorable situations. And so having a flexible mind to be able to perceive that yeah, there's going to be people that need to leave. There's going to be people that need to like really dial into changing their life. And yoga as a spiritual practice, as a science, is going to help with that in a significant way, I believe. And so this leads into the state of the world and cycles that repeat themselves. And when there is a noticeable uptick in upheaval and an uptick in how do I want to say it? In like negative world events, like war and tragedy, and that is when something like yoga comes up as well. And the interesting thing is in the autobiography of a yogi from Paramahansa Yogananda, he talks about this very same thing, that he came to the West and did a lot of his work in the United States during World War I and World War II. And this was a really confusing time for him because he knew the power of yoga, and his practice was Kriya Yoga, which is essentially what we all do as yogis. But he was noticing that the more popular he was becoming and the more potent his teachings were, the more intense the wars were becoming. And that he facilitated this balance, that whenever there's an incredible light that's coming through onto the planet, where you have these very potent figures that are doing really good things, on the other side of it, there's also this darkness that is getting heavier and heavier. And so he talks about how heartbreaking it was. And he, at that time, Gandhi wrote a letter to Hitler about, ending the wars. And so there's an inevitability of balancing very negative world events with very positive world events. And that there's going to be this sway between the two. And then that you're going to have players that are going to be benefiting from these world wars and benefiting from these tragedies and doing everything that they can to reap from the tragedy of that side of humanity. Where then you have the polar opposite, where you have people in doing really great positive things and then benefiting greatly from those positive things. And you have these kind of quasi factions. And it's not like there's really any innate organization of it. I think it's just the nature of this realm, the nature of this world, is that you're going to have people that are going to be magnetized towards the negativity and people magnetized towards the positivity. And I see that happening again now. The difference is that, in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, you maybe had, I don't know, I'm just going to say maybe 1 million people doing yoga of some kind or less, right? Whereas now you have hundreds of millions of people who are yoga practitioners, millions and millions of people who are yoga teachers. And so my hope is that in the consciousness of humanity and the consciousness of the yogis, that there's something that like sparks an interconnection, that in the minds of all the humans that are practicing yoga, that there is something that innately connects them because we're all practicing yoga together. And it would be no different than like all the Buddhists or all the Christians or all the Muslims or all the Jews or like whatever groups and whatever people are practicing and really living that lifestyle, that in this fourth wave of yoga, there's an opportunity. And this is like my prediction side of things, that there's going to be a noticeable power shift, that the potency of the yogic consciousness is much more evident and much more integrated than all the other religions, because in the yogic consciousness, there's no sense of starting war. And that's the thing that I noticed fairly profoundly, that if you look through the history of yoga, there's no figure that used yoga to start wars. You look at Islam, figures used Islam to start wars. You look at Christianity, start wars. You look at Judaism, start wars. Buddhism, I think, is an exception. I don't think that was used to start wars. So it's on the side of yoga. But in the sphere of yoga, I feel that it's different because it's not so dogmatically organized like Buddhism is. So like Buddhism is falling into the side of like world religion, right? Where yoga is a science. Yoga is not a religion. And Christianity has a very hard time with this. Christianity looks at yoga and they're like demon worshipers. Like they're just like immediately like you're putting yourself into these postures and you're opening yourself up to the devil. And that's just ignorance, because yoga is quite literally a science. It is an examination of your body and the mechanics and how this body is the advanced technology of this planet. And so as a technology, it has a particular utilization. And so in our daily utilization of this body, we have a kind of general operation. And that general operation is sleep, procreate, eat, and survive and create things, right? But then in the yogic sense, you have these structures within the body that are your glands, your nervous system, your diaphragms. We have multiple diaphragms. We have diaphragms in our pelvis. We have a diaphragm at our lungs. We have a diaphragm in our throat and the back of our mouth. And the yoga practice is utilizing the body as tools to then manipulate the energetic structure. And in your general operation, you don't know this. We don't think that way. We don't wake up and think, okay, it's time to manipulate my energetic capacity so that my output is at a maximum and is connecting to something greater than myself. The common everyday person doesn't think that way. They wake up and they go, oh shit, I gotta go to work. Okay, I gotta fucking brush my teeth and I gotta eat breakfast and then I gotta go to the office. Oh, I hate going to the office. But then I gotta drop my kids off at school before and then I gotta pick up this, like the utilization of the structures of the body are in a basic programming that we learn through this society. And so all yoga is saying is remove yourself from the programming and look at the body itself. Look at the structure of the body itself. And what happens when you sit, when you move and stretch your body and open it up and then do breath work. And through that breath work, you start to change your biomechanics. You start to change the brainwave states. You start to change your circulation and things start to happen. What are those things that are happening? You're starting to perceive your reality differently. you're starting to look around, you're starting to see networks that you never really saw before. So when you look outside and you see a fence and you see trees and you see a building and you see cars and you see roads and you see birds flying and you see people walking and you see all these things, you're starting to perceive these things differently now through a new lens of energetics. And that's what the science of yoga is teaching. And so when you look at those world religions and you look at the world events, you start to see that, there are very influential players on this planet that have been connected to these religions for thousands of years. And they've been at the helm of this for generations. And that power has been passed on through these royalty and kingdoms and, centuries old corporations. And through their network of control and power through these religions and the organizations, that they know how to manipulate the masses of people to agree to the direction that the planet is going. And so what yoga is doing is going, no, thank you. I don't want to be a part of that programming anymore. I'm going to get in touch with the power of this body and the power of the connectivity to nature and this being. And I'm going to go into something greater than myself so that I can then pull in power from my higher self into this body and radiate that into my space around me and influence my life through that energy. And then you watch how everything unfolds and you watch how your whole reality lightens up and it influences the people around you. And like I said, that doesn't mean that you abandon. That doesn't mean you suddenly quit your job and you move into the jungle and you do it. No. That energy is then embedding into the reality around you. That's all that needs to happen. That's the point. That's the purpose. Pull in light energy, embed it into your reality. Pull in light energy, embed it into your reality. Then when you talk to people, they get it. They're being introduced to that energy and they look at you and they go, you're different. And you go, not really. But different. And so that's what I think the fourth wave is. The fourth wave is then saying no to the cults, saying no to abandoning and leaning into integrating and leaning into honoring, so that if you're going to do a teacher training and you're going to be introduced to a lineage, that you hold on to that lineage and you honor and respect that lineage. And this is why I love my teacher, and this is why I will always be an Ashtanga yoga teacher. There's not ever going to be a point where I go, this is now Zorananda yoga. I will never do that, because he is directly tapped into the original lineage. He had the opportunity to do that because it was in his karma, and he's suited for that because of his strong connection to the original teachings and the kind of initiation that he got, right? So the Ashtanga lineage is directly connected to the Nat lineage. The Nat yoga lineage is the oldest original yoga lineage from India. And so his creation of Ashtanga yoga is a way to directly connect it into the Nat lineage, and he has the blessings to do so. And that's the important thing, is receiving the blessings to be able to create those things. Maybe at some point through Vishwaji, I create something and he goes, yes, I give you my blessings to create that thing, then totally different story. But creating my own thing without his blessing, taking his teachings and being like, hey, I'm going to create my own thing and I'm not going to tell him, then that connection is severed. Then, he's not my teacher anymore. I'm my own teacher. And then that's where the yogic curse comes in. And I'm glad that I have the awareness to realize that. And to get to the point where, yeah, if I were to create something of my own in the yoga world, I would want my blessing for my teacher, for him to go, yep, it's time, do your thing. That's great. And I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Again, in this fourth wave of yoga, receiving an initiation into a path, honor and respect that path, and have fun. You know, in the Ashtanga Yoga teachings, there's 5 elements. There's sound work, there's breath work, there's movement, there's philosophy, and there's joy. And joy is the most important. Joy gets embedded in all those. The joy of doing mantra, the joy of doing breath work and pranayama, the joy of your asana practice, the joy of philosophy and reading and learning, and bliss and joy itself. Thank you for sticking around and listening. Find me on social media. I've been much more active on my yoga account. I've been putting lots of content of my yoga practice on there. So Yogi Zorananda. Check out my music as well. I'll have links to everything in the description. And at the end here, I'm going to play my newest song, Left Behind. I had my friend Michaela Borscher sing harmonies and backing vocals. In my opinion, it's one of my best songs. I'm still learning a lot. I'm still, trying to get better and better. It's a process, and singing and writing music is really hard. It's like one of the hardest things that I've done in my life, in a long time. So, check out my music. Like I said, I'll have links to my website and to my Spotify, and links to my socials. Check me out. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy.